functional expertise. Now, the worst, I'd say, they could be, CMO can be seen as a bit of a tactical or luxury function, right? We did an event.
Hello and welcome to episode 65 of Rockstar CMO FM. The M is the marketing, the F is the well you decide. As you're probably wondering, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? I'm your host, Ian Truscott, and this podcast serves as my excuse to chat with marketing friends, old and new, that I've met through my career as a senior leader and trusted advisor, and hopefully share some marketing street knowledge that will bring out the Rockstar CMO in you. Come say hello at Rockstar CMO on Twitter and LinkedIn. This episode was recorded on Friday the 4th of June. I hope you've had a good week and you are well, safe and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. This week, Julie Ogilvie, former SiriusDecisions and Forrester Research Director, returns to talk about cultivating influencers in B2B. Our guest is Richard Medcalf, an executive coach, and we talk about the relationship between the CMO and the C-suite. And of course, I will round off the week with my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose, for a chat and a cocktail. Right, let's get started, shall we? On to our first segment. As you heard last week, Julie Ogilvie has agreed to join us for the next few weeks, sharing some of her advice on marketing topics that you could describe as greatest hits or maybe pet peeves. If you missed last week's, we had an excellent conversation about creating categories. This week, it's the turn of influencers. Welcome back, Julie, to Rockstar CMO FM. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And we're calling this segment, well, we were going to call this segment Julie Ogilvie's Greatest Hits. I think last time you were saying they're pet peeves. I'm interested where we're going to go with this one, whether this is a greatest hit or a pet peeve. And we're going to talk about, looking at my notes, cultivating influencers. I do like this topic.
Yeah.
Where are we going to go with this one, Julie?
Well, so I spent a great deal of my career in communications, and communications is really about, strategic communications is understanding how to implement a two-step communications process. So, convincing some third-party intermediary who's important to their audience, to support and reinforce your message. And that's really how I think of influencers. I think of influencers in a very sort of a broad way, is understanding who are all those different types of third-party intermediaries and how do they have an impact on the audience. And unfortunately, so on the pet peeve side, today, when people hear that term influencer, they often think of it in a very narrow way. And what they're thinking about is more sort of the consumer marketing side of influencers, which is simply, paid endorsers, And if you choose to go in that direction of thinking about your influencer strategy in that way, I think that is a big mistake. And so that would definitely be something I would try to warn people against, because the B2B buying process is just so different from a consumer purchase. It's much more considered, obviously. It's something where there's so much money on the line. There's, personal standing. There's
emotion.
It often takes months for people to come to a decision. And so, it's not going to be, in most cases, there isn't just one single influencer that's going to help you to achieve all of that, right? Because again, you have multiple parties involved, a long-term decision, and the concerns that the audience have as they're making this decision, the buyers, the would-be buyers, can change from, early on in the process to later in the process. And so really what we would tell people to think about doing when we were at SiriusDecisions, later Forrester, was to really cultivate sort of a basket of influencers that are arrayed around a really strong understanding of who your customer is, what their needs are, and what are the potential sticking points in this buying decision. Where do you need to come in and get them over that hurdle? Where are they feeling like they're not feeling confident in your message to them, what is it that you can do? Who is it that is going to help to reinforce that message and get them over that hurdle?
So how would you recommend that B2B marketers identify those influencers? So, I mean, we often, I'm not going to say struggle is the wrong word, but people tend to create their personas in a hotel conference room with a whiteboard.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But maybe we'll go on to that in another episode. But once we've got a true view of who it is that's influencing, who our buyer is, how do we then find who's influencing them?
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. Very often we would talk to clients and we would say, have you done personas? Yes, we've done personas.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be something like that, where we went to an offsite and we sat in a room and we filled up, pads of paper with descriptions of the audience. And that's an okay way to start. But you really absolutely need to go out then and confirm your understanding with the audience by actually speaking to audience members and understanding. And it's simple questions. And this is often something that is not part of a persona exercise, but absolutely should be, which is understanding what are the audience's watering holes, is what we used to call them.
Yeah.
So who do they trust, and where do they go for information? So that should be a part of that research that you're doing on the audience. And as I'm sure you've seen in your own career, it's amazing. It's almost always where the whole process has gone wrong, is that they haven't actually spoken to the audience or tried to gain that understanding.
Yeah, we talk about that. We've spoken about that actually a few times here on this podcast, is about the fact marketers need to start getting out and meeting people. I mean, even if they start off by meeting sales, that's a start, right? But they start meet the clients, meet potential customers, and find out what makes them tick. So
another thing I'll just say about that too is that it doesn't have to be like a big expensive survey. I think a lot of times people get derailed from doing market research because they go, oh, well, we can't afford to do a big global survey. But, you can just go out and talk to people. Like if you talk to think about how much you learn from talking to 6 or 10 customers. You learn so much and you understand them so much better. And you begin to see the commonalities across an audience. And that's really what you need to do. It doesn't have to always be some big project,
Right. And where do you think this sits? Because, influencer marketing as a channel, which I think is the B2C way of thinking about influencers, sits with, the comms sort of PR, AR kind of area. Where do you think this sits within a large B2B organization?
Well, it still does typically sit with communications. But this brings up another sort of issue that I saw a lot of, which is in a lot of B2B organizations, the comms team is not well integrated within marketing.
Right.
In maybe half of the organizations that I talked to, comms was actually separate than marketing, which is,
crazy.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing. It's a crazy thing. And typically when you see that, comms is acting as like a CEO mouthpiece. Most of what they're doing is like executive comms, and they're, we're going to Davos, and it's great. Whatever, so that's a big missing link right there, is that comms, I believe, should absolutely be a part of marketing, should be part of just the overall marketing planning process. And then, comms should be really helping to understand how do we implement marketing strategies, again, through influencers. The way that we used to talk about it is we saw sort of 7 different kind of archetypes of influencers that are built around different types of needs that buyers have.
Yeah.
And for instance, one type that's very well known in B2B is the trusted advisor. So, this is really the role of analysts, but sometimes it can be played by a business consultant. So it's not always an analyst. And, in other cases, it could be sort of a community. So, for instance, if you have to sell your product, if you need to get the buy-in of developers, there's many different developer communities that are very important. It could be an online community. And I would encourage clients to try to look for different ways that they could develop influence. Sometimes companies become really laser focused on one particular analyst or a small set of analysts where they're not going to be successful. So but if you look at it and you really understand what is it that's causing this particular client to get hung up on this decision, sometimes you can find sort of a replacement for that one analyst that you're trying to influence.
Right. And I mean, it's got more complicated, hasn't it? The world of B2B, because it used to be a simple choice of two top tier analyst firms and a few below them, and it's those people that were influencing all. But nowadays, I think with social media and highly influential bloggers and some great analysts that are now doing their own thing and writing their own thing, that kind of influencer market is now fractured, hasn't it?
It has, and you'll often see different influencers are going to wear different hats. So you may have somebody who is a tech journalist, and they may also have a personal blog. And another one I'll say is, customers are important, like having that customer support, because when you're a buyer, you really want to know what is it going to be like to actually do business with this company. We all hear the great sales pitch, right? And you wonder, well, but what's it really like? And so when customers speak on your behalf, in a way, it's like they're sharing their inside information about what it's like to do business with this company. And we used to do research every couple of years on asking people questions about what were the greatest influences on your buying process. Not surprisingly, analysts come up really high in B2B buying decisions, but customers are very close, and customers play a role in almost every part of the buying process, early, middle, late stage, playing different types of roles, but they're reinforcing that this is the right decision, that you can trust this company, et cetera. And I think with social media, there's more ways for average people who are, experts in their own world to get out there and have important voices. So that's a very important thing to think about. How are we going to cultivate and encourage our customers to speak on our behalf?
Yeah, and I think that customer connection is important, because what I've always thought about when you're dealing with analysts or influencers is what can you offer them? And I think a lot of the time when you're working with an analyst, especially if they're new in the category, or is actually they want to hear from the people that are doing the work, the people that are doing the implementation, the people that have seen the benefit of the category that person covers. Now, as a vendor, you can offer them access to that, right? So they can actually speak to real customers who have had, who can share those stories about how this, because often analysts are passionate about their category, aren't they? I mean, they're obviously not passionate about vendors. That would be wrong, but they're passionate about their category. So they want to see how that's changing the world. And you can, so on that point, what do you think that people can offer influencers in order to get that engagement?
That you've come right down to. That is the crux of it, is how do you create shared value? So you need to have, there's got to be value for you, the vendor, obviously. The value for the customer. What does the customer want? And then what can you give? What is the value to the influencer? And that's often the piece that people don't really spend enough time thinking about. And some of the things you just mentioned are important if you think about different types of influencers. One of the things they want is access to information, because that's how an influencer becomes an even bigger influencer, right? They're constantly looking at how they can increase their reach and their credibility and, their influence on the market. And you can do that by, say, offering access to within your company, people who are making the decisions. And that may be your CTO or maybe your CEO, putting the right people on the phone with analysts and letting them have access and access to the vision and so forth. And then again, customers, having that customer support is such an important part of an influencer strategy. And again, this is why an influencer strategy needs to be understood and accepted across the company. It has to come, you have to have the buy-in of your executives, your engineering team. They all need to understand, why is it important for me to make time to get on the phone with a particular influencer and give them the background. And maybe it's something like, sometimes bringing these people into your organization could even be in some kind of a paid engagement where you're saying, we really want to get your advice, but that's really what the key is, to get the trust, to get the two-way conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I don't want to delve into the murky sort of way that people feel about analyst relations and that you have to pay to play in order to be covered. And that's absolute bullshit. I know that for a fact. But there is a lot of that. But on the other hand, what better way than to engage with somebody who's influential in your market than actually have them on board as an advisor? Right. And then there's that quid pro quo. And it's a financial quid pro quo, sure. But you are. And it also points back to what we were talking about last week in terms of defining the category, because if you're engaging with the influencers of the market, your view about the direction of this category is also an essential part of that influence, isn't it?
Right, it is. And I always, on that whole question of pay to play, it's really what you're paying for when you get a subscription to an analyst firm, or you bring them in for some kind of an engagement, is you're paying for access to them. And, having worked in that field, what I didn't understand when I was running analyst relations, what I would get on the phone, I'd be so angry. Why don't they remember? Why don't they remember? Only a month ago. But of course, they've talked to 100 clients in the course of that month. So you really have to get into a regular cadence of, if you identify particular influencers, it's not like you can just say, okay, we're going to do a call with them and then we're done with them. You really have to, it's important to identify a limited set of influencers so that you can say, let's really develop this relationship over time, because there's just constant noise in the marketplace, and it's
that is such a good point. I mean, I've been on both sides. I was only an analyst for a year for a smaller analyst firm, but I was taking briefings, and I've been on both sides of the table. And I think that if you don't brief very frequently, what happens is you end up talking for 3/4 of the time about the table stakes, right? That they've heard from everybody else. Now, I remember because I was covering web content management, and it would be indiscernible in my mind who it was that would talk to me about a particular table stakes feature, right? But if somebody was engaging on something that was interesting or knew that they were doing, then that stuck in your memory and you talked about that. Now, if you only brief every quarter or something, you spend, like you were saying, you spend half your time reminding the analyst who you are and that you've got these table stakes covered, and yes, we do that. Yes, we do that. Before you get onto the sizzle, which is the bit they might remember, or the access to the customer, or something interesting one of your customers has done. And so I think I've talked too much for somebody who's interviewing somebody else, but I think that's a really important point.
Absolutely. And some of what you're getting to is, how do you manage those calls too? It's so easy to just spend the first 15 minutes of a call talking about our founder and, these things. And it's like, we're just.
How many offices you've got, how many people are there and stuff like that. Whereas there are some interesting stats probably in those slides, but it's figuring out which is the thing that what used to annoy me was that people would come on the call and they would have no idea who you were. They hadn't even bothered looking you up and looking you up on LinkedIn and understanding what thing you might be interested in, what you're writing about, or I think all of that research needs to come up front, doesn't it, before you deal with the analyst, and something can really click, can't it? It's like, oh, they're really interested in this. I've got a customer story for them.
Yeah. What's funny is, so being at Serious Decisions, we were all B2B. Yeah. And we would take briefings from various MarTech firms, and they would come on with all consumer examples. And we kept saying, okay, that's some B2B examples, and, sort of go right by them. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I touched on Content Marketing Institute last week, but I think that's where they found their place in the market as influencers, in that they do an awful lot of research into B2B, which is fairly sparse before that, because, like you say, because I think as well, because as consumers, we understand B2C, don't we? And we understand how it affects us. And so it's easy to pluck out B2C examples, but B2B is a little harder.
It certainly is. And you're thinking about content marketing, it takes it to a whole new level just because of the complexity of the decisions that are being made, and, talking about technology and things like that. It's, more than, here, I'm wearing this, cute dress from, whatever company, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've scratched the surface, so we've come up to time, and but I think that's a really important topic about influencers and B2B. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts there. Your greatest hit. I don't think that was a pet peeve. I think that was the greatest hit.
That was the greatest hit. I enjoyed this topic. I wish people would think about it more. So
fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Julie. What I should have done, and I didn't do this last week, is if people want to find out more about this topic from you, Julie, where will they find you when they spin the dial on the interwebs?
Well, my current home is chubbycouple.media, which is my husband, who is also a CMO and strategist, where we are pontificating about various personal and professional topics.
Splendid. Well, I'll include a link to that in the show notes. And of course, I think you're also on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'll include those links too. Thank you very much, Julie. And will I see you next week for another one of your hits or one of your pet peeves?
I will be happy to return.
Thank you very much. I'll see you then.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Julie. An essential topic in B2B marketing, influencing their influencers. As you heard, you can find Julie on LinkedIn at chubbycouple.media, and she's Ogleview on Twitter. I will, of course, include all her links in the show notes. Please say hello and let us know what you think of influencer marketing. My next guest is Richard Medcalf, an executive coach and leadership consultant to exceptional founders and CEOs and their teams. As you'll hear, his clients are elite performers who have already achieved incredible things and still have the ambition to achieve more in terms of their impact and influence. He does this through one-to-one coaching, working with the whole leadership team, or scaling this to create a high-performance culture throughout the business. After a master's degree at Oxford University, Richard started his career in a premier strategy consultancy where he rose to become the youngest ever partner. He then spent 11 years at tech giant Cisco, elevating Cisco's relevance in the C-suite of its Fortune 100 customers before being selected for an elite team by Cisco's president and CEO, John Chambers and Chuck Robbins, to catalyze strategic partnerships and new business models. Keen to marry the disciplines of strategy and leadership in service of his clients, he qualified as a senior leadership consultant and executive coach before founding X Quadrant in 2017. Very lucky to have Richard share his advice with us. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome, Richard, to Rockstar CMO FM. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks, Ian. It's great to see you.
No, it's nice to see you too. Nice to meet you. So, Richard, tell us a little bit about yourself. I've obviously done a little bit of an intro before we start, but tell us a bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I guess I like to say that I'm what you get if you put a McKinsey consultant, a slightly orthodox pastor, and an entrepreneur into a blender.
I like that.
Will it blend?
Will it blend? And what happens when you do put those things into a blender and it blends?
So, not to bore you with my life story, I was a strategy consulting partner. I worked in tech at Cisco for many years. And now what I do is I guess I help some of the most impressive tech sector execs on the planet take themselves and their team to a whole new level of success. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Right. So you're a CEO advisor. That's what...
Yeah, that's right. So I'm founder of a coaching business. It's called X Quadrant, I work with founders and CEOs and other senior execs, often, as I said, in tech and fast-moving teams. Example, one of my clients runs a $2 billion tech services company. Another just raised $200 million for his technology sector business. Another one just been nominated as Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young for his growth and profitability. So these are fascinating clients. But what they always have, I suppose, is a couple of psychographics. Which I think is really interesting. So, and sometimes I don't work with people who are not CEOs, right? But they think like CEOs, as I like to say.
Right.
And what I mean by that is they are high achievers. You might know, you're sure you know people like this. Probably one yourself, right? High achievers, smart, strategic, fascinated by complexity, great track record. People look from the outside going, "Wow, this is great. Look at where you've got to."
Yeah.
But inside, it just feels. It's just what I do. It's not that special.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, and I'm hungry for more impact and I know that I can 10x what I'm doing. I know I can play a bigger game.
Yeah.
But when you've already got to a certain level, then re-engineering that success formula that's got you there feels a bit risky. It feels a bit uncertain. What got me here is not going to take me there, and that's the game I love to play with my clients.
That's fascinating, because it is fascinating to learn what goes on the inside of folks that you look at, particularly nowadays with the highly curated social media that we get to see of people, of what's really going on and what's really ticking. So that must be a fascinating work.
Yeah, it's interesting, and and I did it at various levels. I mean, one thing I do have is a podcast as well. Vive the podcast revolution and all that.
Absolutely.
And that's called the Impact to Multiply It CEO podcast. I say it's a podcast for CEOs and people who think like CEOs. And I do two things. I present some of my own content, but I also interview other CEOs. And it's really interesting because you start to pick up some of these common themes. And even CEOs playing at the highest levels. They're actually going, I need to get myself out of some of this operational stuff. I need to make these shifts. I need to be doing less of this and more of this. And all this thing kind of comes up no matter what level you are. There's always a next step if you look for it.
Yeah, no, and isn't it fascinating when you run a podcast? It gives you a great excuse to talk to some really fascinating people, doesn't it? And then back to this podcast, as this is a marketing show, the reason why I wanted to chat to you as a CEO coach was to get your take from a CEO's perspective of the role of the CMO and the role of marketing. So how do you see in the various interactions you're having with these CEOs, how do you see that relationship right now?
I guess at the best, right? At best. I mean, the CMO, I think there's a couple of key functions for the CEO. The first one is can really amplify the CEO's voice and give them a platform and sharpen them up, right? So the CMO can be a great advisor to the CEO in terms of how do we actually take the vision, the strategy that you are championing and get it in the right places and get it to land. So I think that is a key role. And the other one is really within the company. At best, the CMO can be a fantastic connector because often CMO doesn't have the direct authority to drive the product, the services, the delivery, or the rest of it. But what they do have is that vision of the customer journey and of the ultimate outcome. Right. And often that's the factor that gets lost when you start to look at all the different silos. So I think the CMO at best can be looking at the gaps in between the silos rather than just their own functional expertise. Now, at the worst, I'd say they could be, CMO can be seen as a bit of a tactical or luxury function, right? We did an event, let's do an event, let's roll out a campaign. And it's kind of, there's the sales engine, which is going, and then marketing is some magic dust that we sprinkle on top, and we're not quite sure.
Right, because they don't see the value. And that sort of, I was going to ask you about, there's a lot of talk about the tenure of CMOs and the fact that it's gotten shorter. I don't know that the data completely supports it. I think it's like 46 months or so. I can't remember what it is, but it's less than the other members of the C-suite. Why do you think that is? Is it because there is that disconnect between what the CEO sees as the value of the CMO and what they could do for them, and what then it turns into, or what their perception is of marketing?
I think my suspicion is that people rise up through marketing based on their marketing skills, right, and everything else, and they have a real functional expertise of marketing. And the danger is that when they arrive at the C-suite, they're treating marketing really as a bit of a black box, right, that produces stuff, campaigns and this and that, and they're not necessarily always really co-creating with the other execs to really solve what are the business issues that so-called business leaders, right? I mean, the P&L owners, whatever, might be feeling. And so when you actually create those alliances with those leaders to say, like, what is it that the business needs, right? And what's marketing's role in the solution to that? I think you can create stronger outcomes, right? And more support against the base. And I guess the other way of looking at that is, don't assume that there are expectations in place about what marketing does, what it's there for, what its value is, but create agreements around that. So take the lead on defining success,
Right.
What is marketing's role in the business, right? Is it magically generating leads? Is it positioning the brand in a certain way? What is the business counting on marketing for? And don't accept all the vanilla answers that other members of the exec team will originally give you. It's up to you as CMO to really define that and explain why it's a key role and how that's going to drive the company's strategy. Do you see what I mean? It's kind of
absolutely
having those conversations. And making sure that you get down to the level of detail. It's easy. It's almost easy to kind of get a quick, do some campaign, do some stuff. It's going to be great. Right. But actually drilling deep so that the exec team colleagues get that aha, I think it's important. So in summary, I guess two things: really building those alliances across the business and defining success. I think are things that not every CMO does brilliantly.
And do you think it's easier almost? I mean, a lot of the blame for this sort of thing lies, marketing isn't understood and it's everybody else's fault. Is it that the CMOs are defaulting to what they know, which is run campaigns and stuff like that, and are not honing those skills and not speaking in that same language of what the value is to the rest of the C-suite? Is that what you're saying?
Isn't it? It's funny, isn't it? It's like, how do you market marketing? It's really fascinating at that level. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I say to all my clients is, what made it successful last year won't make it successful next year. But we almost always rely on that success formula we built last year because it just gave us a result, right? It just gave us a successful year perhaps last year. And so I think making that shift to say, how do we, within marketing, how do we add value into the business? And I think often it's going to be found in the gaps. It's not going to be on the org chart. It's going to be in the gaps. How do we get sales and product working real closely together, right? How do we take customers along a journey? And I think you can lead the discussion at that.
Right.
You can lead the discussion, but you have to step out of that comfort zone a little bit and rather than being operational.
Yeah, because as a CMO, I mean, you've got access to all of that information and data. You're right. The CMO has that unique position where they have that purview across, we've got data coming out of our ears, right? So in theory, from what you've described about mapping the customer journey, understanding those gaps, and then liaising with other members of the team to where those gaps sit, sounds like a natural thing that we could easily do. So that's interesting. And what practical steps, what practical advice? I mean, I know you were an advisor to CEOs rather than CMOs, but what practical steps would you give for people who are doing that step up and they're used to, they're good at executing on their craft, but they need to learn this sort of language of that level of these disciplines?
Yeah, I can give you that, and I can give it from both sides of the story because I do work with, as we said, a lot of CEOs and founders, either those who are new to role or those who are just taking, want to step up a bigger game and going through complex change. But I also do work with people who are, either on that fast track coming up to the board level, who are just got promoted onto the C-suite, who are just one level below as well. And so I think some of the things I've learned from those other C-suite leaders would definitely apply to people in the marketing function. So here are a couple of ideas. So I think the first one is, conversely, stop trying to wow them with your marketing skills. Right? Like that's a health factor, right?
I love it.
And so as marketing is seen in a functional context, it means that if you just go in with your marketing hat, you're not seen at that point as a peer, really.
Right.
Or you're seen as, you're the specialist. You like the marketing geek over here for marketing things. What you want to is, you've got your marketing hat, but also you need to wear the business leader hat, which is cross-functional. What are the business outcomes? How do we partner? How do we collaborate? And how do I help solve your problems, Mr. CEO or CTO or whatever? I mean, you can solve CTO problems. CTO is under a massive set of everyone wants stuff from the CTO. It's unfulfillable set of development requests. He's not got enough resources, all the rest of it, right? How do you help solve his problems with a marketing lens? You can do that, right? How can you help sales, etc.? And so I think not wearing the marketing hat, but actually solving cross-functional problems. I think the second one is, don't just have a marketing plan, have a plan for marketing.
Wow. Okay.
So where do you want to take marketing as a function, right? What's the value it's adding now? and what's the value it should be adding and could be adding in the future, right? What does the future hold? And where are you trying to take things? Again, start to communicate that and build agreement within the executive team that is going to add more value for them, that it's a brighter future in terms of what marketing can deliver. So I see, again, marketing experts can be really, really good at delivering on the operational elements. But what are you trying to do broader than that, right? What are the capabilities you're building into the into the machine?
Right, moving beyond the awareness and MQL conversation then.
Yeah, exactly. And so I suppose that there's kind of two resources that come to mind when you talk about this, like how do you move into the C-suite or operate with a high level of impact there. So the first one is you need to free yourself from operations, create margin so that you can think and act strategically, so you can build those relationships, those capabilities.
Yeah.
And it's really tricky, right? Because again, normally marketing, probably under-resourced, whatever, could do with more people, a lot of expectations, a lot of things being thrown your way. You need to be able to, though, rise above that avalanche and find time to think. And it's a key thing. A little resource I have is on my website. You can go to xquadrant.com/go/productivity assessment. There's a hyphen between the two last words. And that productivity assessment it's an executive, it's just 10 questions, but it will basically help you step back and think, how much time am I actually focusing on those strategic things, and where are the kind of the pitfalls that I am personally likely to fall into? So that could be a good little tool. And then there's an option to then go through like a free email series that I have on that very question of how do you free up your time for strategic activity.
I think that's really good point. I mean, that's an incredibly good point. I find that in my own day job, day life, is to jump off the hamster. I mean, I'm always talking about the marketing hamster wheel that everybody jumps on, and then we're just executing, and nobody's really thinking. Somebody else chucks in another request into the hamster wheel, and off you go. And everybody, you've got to step back, ask why. And then I really like this idea of thinking beyond what you can do as marketing now, and then what marketing can do for the business in a year's time. That's really, and I'll add those resources into the show notes so other people can look at them too.
Yeah, you mentioned the hamster wheel. It's exactly that. I say it's a hamster wheel or a flywheel. The difference between the two is the hamster wheel is the things you're going to have to do for the next campaign, the next project, the next customer, the next event. The flywheel is when you invest your time on things which create new capabilities. So how do we simplify it so that I don't have to do it next time? All right. How do I delegate? How do I simplify, build capabilities in the business? And that is the shift often.
I love that. I mean, that sounds like the title of a blog post, me moving from the hamster wheel to the flywheel. And I think any advice you can give people about doing that would be great, because that is the scourge of marketing, is becoming an execution marketing and doing what the business expects time and time again, and reinventing its stuff, and not taking that strategic view and not engaging the C-suite at that kind of level. I love that.
Well, there's actually an article I wrote about it. We can drop the link in. It's called The 5 Influence Killers, the subtle traps that keep you stuck in operations and out of the C-suite, right? And what you can do about it. And clearly one of those key ones is exactly what we just talked about, being on that hamster wheel, right? We can perhaps give a link in the show notes or whatever. But
I will, absolutely. Yeah, I will. I think it's going to be a good set of show notes. You've named three resources there that sound fantastic. All right, so that's how we're going to fix the relationship with the CEOs and CMOs. And I'm going to now move on to my final question, which is a regular feature we have here on Rockstar CMO, which is called the swimming pool, where we chuck all the snake oil bullshit and overhyped trends that plague this marketing craft we love. I don't know whether you love it. I do.
I love it, yeah. What a business. I love marketing, yeah.
What would you chuck in our Rockstar CMO swimming pool?
Yeah, I had a good think about this. Obviously, this is dangerous territory, right? Because I'm talking to a whole bunch of marketers and I'm not a professional marketer. But yeah, I'm going to say, Here's a good one. Stop optimizing the funnel. Okay,
Really?
optimizing the funnel. Yeah, it's a good one, I thought, because everyone's like, yeah, but that's great. Well, the reason is it's a dangerous addiction, because optimizing the funnel gives us numbers we can multiply together to show how valuable we are. Oh, look, I increased this sales page conversion rate by 1%. And if I multiply all that through by big numbers, I've saved you $1 billion, Mr. CEO, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that you're optimizing individual aspects of a system, a very complicated system. So you can have masses of people coming into your funnel, but they're all the wrong people.
Yes.
So what I'd want to say is stop optimizing the funnel and start optimizing for happy customers.
Love it. Yeah. Because we are, I mean, but it's such a trope, and it comes up a lot actually on this podcast. Is this idea that we're all I mean, we mentioned MQLs twice or 3 times already, right? Is that's the way we want to optimize? Then how do we get to the MQL? And then there's all this data, and it's always wonderfully seductive to get involved with optimizing. But also, what do you do once you've optimized?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been some studies showing that you can actually, if you imagine you build out your sales funnel and you say, let's optimize the first part, and then we'll go to the second part, and you optimize the third part, and the first part breaks, right? Because suddenly, say the people who are coming in here, you're optimizing for acquisition, and over here you're optimizing for conversion, and they're not the same. And so it requires this kind of broader systems thinking, right? Which is to really say, like, how do we actually, from the start, like, we know who our customers are going to be, who are actually going to rave about our service, and how do we actually optimize for that at every stage in the process,
and find more of them than just more warm bodies at the top end. Yeah, I get it. No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. So that almost certainly will be going in our Rockstar CMO swim pool. It sounds like very good. I mean, we've been chucking MQLs in for the last few weeks, so so I think this is all related. And then finally, so when people, you've already given us a few links and some excellent resources to go for, but when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where would they find you, Richard?
Yeah, so obviously 2 usual places. My website is xquadrant.com. And say there's a bunch of stuff there which people might find interesting. Even if you're not a CEO, hopefully these are things which anyone who's kind of trying to be ambitious and make things happen in the world will enjoy. There's the podcast we mentioned, and then find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect. I'm always happy. Just mention the podcast and happy to connect and start conversations. It's what I love.
And the name of your podcast?
So it's called the Impact Multiplier CEO.
Excellent. Well, I'll be looking out for that, and I'll include all the links in the show notes. Thank you very much for your time, Richard. It's splendid to speak to you this morning.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Richard. I wanted to share something a bit different this week, the point of view of the CEO. I hope you found that insightful. I'll include all the links to the resources Richard referred to in the show notes. Definitely worth a look. Right, it's that time of the week. It's Friday evening, and it's time to find out where my friend and content marketing guru Robert Rose would like to transport us to for a marketing thought and a cocktail in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Hello, my friend. And as promised last week, I am swooping down from the air conditioning ducts into the bar, and here I am with my fancy tuxedo on and everything. So tonight, we are going to have something pure. We're going to go with a pure tequila because I have found a new tequila, and I have to thank my friend Jay Bear, who you know, of course, as well.
Well, I don't know him. I have a book on my shelf, and I revere him from distance on the socials.
He's a lovely, lovely man, and is also a tequila hound, like myself. And he turned me on to this tequila, which is not expensive. It's a tequila called San Matias Gran Reserva.
Right.
And I get not paid at all for saying their name, nor do I ever get any free bottles. But if they wanted to send me some free bottles, I would certainly accept them. Anyway, it is one of my favorites now, and is just a delightful, delightful tequila. It doesn't need anything but a squeeze of lime, on the rocks, and it's just an absolute killer. And so that we're just going to go pure. We're going pure, squeeze of lime into a little bit of San Matias Gran Reserva tequila. And we will sit there and we'll probably pour ourselves a triple because, it's that kind of week.
That sounds fantastic. Well, I'll attempt to recreate that incredibly complicated drink using the ingredients in my desktop bar. I didn't hear
you're going to have more ingredients than I do this week.
Yeah, did you put ice in yours?
Yes, indeed, on the rocks.
Splendid. And I am, let me see. So again, I've got the lightest of English tequilas called Bombay Sapphire Dry Gin. So,
yes, and that is the opposite of what this is, but yes, go ahead.
Oh, was it a heavy tequila this week?
Oh, the Gran Reserva is not a heavy. It's not heavy. It's just it's got a very distinct flavoring from the aging process. So it's a Gran Reserva, so it's been aging a bit. So there's definitely a flavor to it, which makes it beautiful when it's pure like that.
Splendid. And I am going to impure my gin with some, which isn't even pure tonic water. It's cucumber tonic water by the good people at Fever Tree, if anybody's listening.
There you go.
Yeah, I've never had any kind of action from the various gin companies.
No, I don't either. Nobody. Yeah.
And I think Dennis Shower's completely given up trying to promote me now. I need to fire him as my gin manager, I think. Let me try this.
Yeah.
That's delicious, Robert. Very nice indeed. Mine's slightly less pure than yours. And what did we call that?
Well, isn't that just the way? I mean,
And what do we call that, sir?
Well, if first of all, we have to travel somewhere. And where we are going to travel this week.
Yes.
Have you ever you've been to Greece, yes?
Yes, I have. Yes, I've been to the islands.
And so have you been to Santorini?
No, I haven't been to Santorini.
It's on my bucket list.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really want to go to Santorini. I was in Greece when I was a very young man and went with a tour group and and did the Athens thing and with the Acropolis and the ruins and the Olympics and all that kind of stuff, which is great. I mean, it was definitely one of my highlight trips of all time. Mm-hmm. But we did not get to any of the Greek Isles, and especially Santorini, where I really, really, really want to go. And so, because we can go anywhere in this show, I think we should go to Santorini and sit on the beach and drink this lovely tequila as we watch the sunset there.
I think that's fantastic, isn't it? The local delicacy is ouzo, isn't it? I think so. We may have to find out if there's a decent version of that.
Right, exactly.
But that sounds fantastic. So we're there, and yes, where have I been? I've been to one of the islands I can't remember the name of, and I've been to Rhodes, I think, as well. So yes, very nice. And me and my wife went, I think, before we had our children. So that's quite a long time ago.
I love it.
But yes. So we, as we say each week, we would go to these lovely places and not talk about marketing. But if we were to talk about marketing, what would we be talking about this week, Robert?
So I'm just coming off of so every year I do I guess you call it a mastermind. I don't know whether it's a mastermind or not. It's something I've been doing for the last decade. And what it is my, I call it kind of brain yoga or mind yoga or something like that, because what it ends up doing is really stretching my imagination and my thinking, because it's a group of people that I've been getting together with them for the last 10 years, and they come from all different industries.
Yeah.
Primarily in the economics and finance industry. So there's economists, there's financial advisors, there's hedge fund managers, there's big professors from university. There are some artists that come. There are some head CEOs and heads of business of big companies, some startups. It's really just a group of very accomplished. I don't know what the hell they do investing in me, but but very accomplished people who get together each year. And usually it's in a beautiful place like Santorini, usually here in the U.S. But of course, the last couple of years have been, locked down because of COVID, and so it's been on Zoom for the get together. And this year, we just finished it, and there was something that really struck my attention, and it's got me thinking a lot. Which is, so on the first day, they had this professional magician sort of take us behind the scenes of a magic trick.
Yeah.
And basically show us how it's done, right? Everything, show the whole trick. And one of the things, it was a card trick, and I can explain the card trick if we have time or want to. But basically, at the card trick, it was one of those things where he's making cracking jokes as he does the card trick, and boom, 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 and brings an audience up, and the audience picks a card, and the whole thing, right? And one of the things as he did the card trick was the sort of heart or the trick of the trick was he has a card in his hand and he puts it down as he says, he says to the audience member, "Tell me when to stop." And he's peeling out cards, and then the audience member goes, "Stop." And usually it's right when he's got, a card in his hand that he's about to lay down, and one, then he's got the deck in the other hand.
Yeah.
And as it works out, he knows which card is which, because when the audience member says stop, it's one of the two cards, either the top card in the deck or the one in his hand.
Right.
Now, the key is the audience member has said stop, and he calls this the moment of ambiguity. And he says the key is for any magician to play the moment of ambiguity. And I thought that was amazing, because basically what he does is he doesn't let the audience member catch him in that moment of ambiguity, because he knows which card he wants to be the stop card.
Yeah.
But the audience member it may also have an opinion on that, but he doesn't let the audience. He moves very quickly and swiftly and goes, and it's the card in his hand. He just puts down the deck and goes, "This is your stop card. We'll put it down for a moment, and then we'll crack a couple more jokes before we turn it over and reveal that it was your card, and what a wonderful trick."
Yeah.
So the interesting thing to me is that moment of ambiguity, because it's something for us as content creators, as people who create thought leadership of content. It's something we can play with as well, because, for example, if we're writing a story, right, and we've stumbled upon some interesting way to improve a process, well, instead of jumping right to the how-to of the solution, well, what if you set up some metaphorical story to sort of set up the tension and guide the audience to answer? And hopefully it's entertaining and all of that. And then, you go, "Oh, there you go. Boom. I've got the answer for you." And you sort of, so in other words, you use that moment of ambiguity when you set up the big question with the audience, like, will it or won't it?
Yeah.
And you already know where you're bringing the audience, but you bring them there in an unexpected way without letting them make a decision one way or the other, and playing that moment of ambiguity to help get to the end of the story and be much more satisfying at the answer.
Yeah.
And that's just a really cool trick I thought that the magician could teach us.
Yeah, I love that, because I was reading, you hear this a lot, don't you, about B2B marketing, about the fact that really a lot of B2B marketing, you just scream the solution before you do any of that kind of talking about the problem, or these are the features, this is the product, rather than working our way through the journey of the buyer and what the challenges they have and all of that stuff.
Exactly. It's that, it's like the classic case study. It's like, Bob had a problem and magically we've got a solution for it. Right. And then what happens is that the audience either goes, "Oh, okay. Not very interesting, but whatever." Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for the solution. And, everything's unicorns and rainbows and this, and that's a case study, right?
Yeah.
But instead, if we play with that little moment of ambiguity where we set up a question where it could go either way, but we very quickly go to something that takes your mind out of that, takes the audience's mind out of the ambiguity there, and helps set up the solution so that by the time you get to the solution, the audience feels like they made the decision.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, you've created something that's not only engaging and entertaining, but also instructive, right? You created a bit of magic for that, getting to that solution, and it's much more powerful.
Yeah. The interesting thing there about case studies, though, the really hard bit of case studies is the problem. It's like the hero's journey that I know you talk about in your content marketing books. Is you can't get anybody to talk about the challenge in case it makes either the company, one side of the case study looks bad. You know what I mean? Like we were a complete shambles, and it's like, well, nobody wants to say how terrible, that to go through the pain of the journey of how they came to implement this great piece of software that's now changed their lives. It didn't all go, we had a problem and then Bob came and saved the day. It's, there were a number of iterations through that. And some of that story is hugely valuable to other people that are trying to make that same journey. But some of it, people just don't want to be told, do they?
Right. Or the implications or the challenges that came up from choosing the right solution.
Yes.
Which is also something that we're very shy to do. It's like, we don't want to point out the fact that, if you choose this, it's going to be really hard. You know what I mean? And it's going to be, it's the right answer, but guess what? You're in for a big adventure. It's sort of like we go, no, it's going to be simple and easy and awesome and great. And what you do with the audience is they go, I don't believe you for 1 minute.
18 months ago, we had a problem. And today, everything's excellent. Sorry, did you say 18 months ago? What happened there? Nothing.
Exactly. What happened in months 11 and 12? Oh, well, that was when I started drinking. Yeah. That's when I started my heroin addiction. Yes, that's,
Oh no, this is an excellent point. So what you're saying is that we need to tell better stories, and we should reveal the solution, much like this magician that was teaching you.
Yeah, exactly. Set up the ambiguity and let and play with it, right? That was what was so fascinating to me was that he purposely sets it up like that because he has to, in order to make the trick work, he has to set it up like that. Yeah. But the moment, what was so fascinating to me when listening to him talk was, instead of just going, and rushing and going, okay, you pick this card, right?
Yeah.
He actually paused for a moment there and played with that moment of ambiguity and made a joke. Yeah. And the way he made that joke, by the way, was he said, so he had the deck of cards in one hand and the card in the other hand. And by the way, it could be either card depending on when the person says stop.
Yeah.
And so it can be one of those two cards. And he doesn't know which one to actually choose. Well, he knows which one he needs to choose.
Yeah.
But he needs to give the impression to the audience that they have a choice without giving them a choice. Yeah. That's that moment of ambiguity. And what was so amazing to me was the easy way out, the sort of, cheat, if you will, is to just force it, right? Is to just put the deck aside and then have the other card and go, boom, there you go. That's going to be your card. That's where you told me to stop. Yeah. And not let the audience make a choice. But what he does is he stops and tells a joke at that moment and goes, he's like, hey, wait a minute. You just told me to stop here and I've got two cards in my hand. What are you talking about? You're driving me crazy here. Are you? And it's everybody thinks he's funny. Yeah. And then he goes, all right, now let's just move along and then he just sort of casually puts down the one he doesn't want. Yeah. And so he actually plays with that moment of ambiguity and actually takes longer than you think you should to actually be in that moment, which makes it even more powerful that you think it was ultimately your choice.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if we were to read, particularly B2B marketing, that was like a thriller that you didn't really know how it was going to end?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Will Bob solve their problem in this case study?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh, how great a case study would that be, right? I mean,
a rip-roaring read. Yeah, it's a page turner. No, I love it. Thank you very much, Robert. And where can we find other thoughts such as this if we were to spend the night on
so, if I were to actually play with my own ambiguity, I would probably blog more than I do. We've been very busy. This is and by the way, I've written on what a bullshit excuse the cobbler's kids idea is. So I am definitely not following my own medicine here. But typically, when we do publish, and I am going to catch up, we publish at contentadvisory.net, which is of course our little home on the interwebs.
Yeah. And I think you've got a ton of evergreen stuff there, so I think it's well worth a trip through.
We do, but it's no excuse. We do, but it's no excuse. It's absolutely zero excuse.
I love it. And when they're looking for you, Robert, where will they find you?
Oh, well, they'll find us on the social media at Robert_Rose on Twitter. And of course, wonderful sort of LinkedIn keyword search thing, LinkedIn. Yes, do that.
Absolutely. And I'll include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you very much, my friend. And you finding it comfortable up there in the air conditioning?
No, I think we need to open up that space a little bit. I'm going to need some I'm looking at some new IKEA furniture up there, and we're gonna need to sort out my living conditions up in the bar.
Well, there's always the piano.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. I shall try and lure you back down from from there next week.
That sounds fantastic.
I assume you'll be there. Okay, see you then. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye. Thank you, Robert. Time to add a bit of magic to our content marketing. So that's a wrap on episode 65 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. Thanks again to Julie, Richard, and Robert. I really appreciate their time. So please thank them by checking out the show notes, clicking their links, follow them, and take a look at their work. You can find the show notes at rockstarcmo.fm, where you can also find all our previous episodes. But most of all, thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track, and driving along with us. Does the world need another effing marketing podcast? Let me know what you think. Please leave a rating, review, and subscribe, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, Julie Ogilvy will be back. I'm chatting to one of our listeners, Julia Bennett, the brand new CMO of global law firm Brown & Rudnick. And it sounds like I'll find Robert Rose in our virtual Rockstar CMO bar. Until then, I've been your host, Ian Truscott, and hope you'll join us next week here at Rockstar CMO FM.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the Boys Club of Advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.